In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse, but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrence and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrence and Sandy.
Hello and welcome to the Lunch with Sandy podcast. I'm Terrence.
And I'm Sandy.
And as usual, Sandy and I are having the conversations that married couples need to have. Sandy, got a pop quiz for you.
Okay.
If I say today's special, you know what that means?
What are we eating?
No, we're not eating. Although this is called the Lunch with Sandy podcast, we're not eating. Change in the format. Today's special is going to be the topic that we are going to discuss on the episode.
Okay.
And today's special has to do with marriage goals. But before we get into the marriage goals, it sounds like I said coals there for a second.
Sound like coal.
We're going to get the formalities out of the way. How you doing today?
I'm a little annoyed.
A little annoyed. You know, one of these days when I say, how are you doing? You're just going to say, I'm great. Just like Tony the Tiger. Why are you annoyed?
Seeing that I was expecting rain and it hasn't come, I would have planned my day a little differently.
Well, see, that's where you need to take cues from me. Okay. I don't follow the forecast. If I got to do something, I do it.
Well, it's not that that was the issue, is that I did have stuff to do, but I probably would have enjoyed just sitting in the pool.
All you have to do is just prepare for whatever and just go out and actually get it done. And the forecast cannot stop you. You know, I'm undefeated versus the elements.
Okay. Sure.
All right. Before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let me get into the spotlight of the week. This week's spotlight shines on Awoken Apparel and my man, Anthony Sanders. Did you see the kits that I came in the house with today? Don't forget to send that man his money.
I did not see the kits.
It's hot.
I did send him the money.
Listen, they're straight fire. They're straight fire. Shout out to my man, Court Carrera, too. We went riding today. We did one of the old squad, me, Court, and Ant did one of our rides today. So we got a chance to chop it up and kick it like we used to kick it. And the kit is fire. He also did some hats from TSCC, and those are fire too. So yeah, that's the spotlight of the week. Now, on to today's special.
Okay.
Whenever you want to accomplish something in life, or whatever it is, typically, in order to be successful, you got to set some goals, right? You got to put time and effort into whatever it is that you want to do. And normally you don't have a problem doing that. Setting goals allows you to follow a roadmap and hold yourself accountable on your way to whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, right? Mm-hmm. It also helps you prioritize things. But with that being said, I think that every couple would benefit from setting marriage goals when they get married.
Yeah, my goal is to retire in 2 years.
That has nothing to do with setting goals in your marriage.
What are you talking about? I felt like it was a pretty good goal right there.
So aside from your retirement goal, how do you feel about couples setting goals in their actual marriage?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So one, I think it's important to talk about the goals, right? Make sure that you're on the same page. As we know from previous conversations, you are not on the same page as me retiring in 2 years. So, that's something that we have to continue to further discuss.
There's no discussion regarding that. You're not going to retire in 2 years. And that's because we have goals that would not be met if you retired in 2 years. So that's going to be something that you're going to have to reevaluate. You're right. Setting goals in a marriage does make sure that, you and your significant other, your spouse, partner, or whatever, are on the same page. It also allows you to focus on the relationship in each other, which is essential to have, a long lasting marriage. When you sit down and discuss setting goals and what it is that you want to accomplish, you have to put thought and effort into that, and you have to take into account your needs, your partner's needs. And I think when you do that, that actually makes the relationship stronger, because you have to be able to put yourself in that person's shoes. And at the same time, there's a process of compromising and communication that actually happens during that, because you may not have the same goals originally, and you may have to work towards a common goal.
Right. Yeah. Because either meeting halfway, compromising, give and take, whatever you want to call it. Right. Because you're not always going to be on the same page, and that's going to precipitate additional conversation. Although I think some goals you can be pretty spot on, if you have the common interests and things of that nature.
That's true, and we're going to get into specific type of goals in a minute. Additionally, when you set goals, it can expose you to new ideas and ways of thinking, which can benefit your marriage, because you can be having a conversation and you speak of a particular goal, or you talk about how you're going to reach a particular goal, and the way that you have to get there might be a route that you haven't taken before. And so that opens you up to new paths, new ideas. And I think that can be good for any marriage.
Yeah. And honestly, reassessing goals. Sometimes you might have a goal for one thing, and then based on life circumstances, you might have to reassess and, discuss, where you were on the same page and now it's a new topic, and reassessing if is this the right goal that we want to continue towards, or do we have to, make some changes?
Yeah, and reassessing is a good point, because if you don't have any goals, you ain't got anything to reassess. So having those goals gives you the opportunity to gain experience in reassessing those goals and other things when life comes at you fast.
Right. I don't think we had the same goals today as we did, back in, 2008, we'll say, just to throw a number out there, right? We were going down one path in 2008, then Ayla came along, right? And we had to reassess our goals.
True, and that leads me to, when you talk about setting goals specifically for a marriage, I think there are some specific goals that every couple should set. Mm-hmm. And when I look at those different goals, you talk about where you were 10 years ago and where you are, I look at those goals and I kind of break those things down. I break those goals down. And the first goal in of itself, I also break the first goal. I think the first goal should be of the financial nature. And when I look at, the financial aspect that I think couples should start to venture down, and I look at from three aspects. I look at short-term goals, I look at long-term goals, and I look at behavior goals. And when I talk about short-term goals, for the most part, particularly in this country, the so-called American dream is to be a homeowner. And that might be changing, but as a short-term goal, I would imagine as a couple, you need to start thinking about, okay, well, I need to save X amount of dollars for whether it be a down payment on a house, a down payment on a particular type of business you want to start, or whatever it is. Having that short-term goal so you can actually work towards reaching that, and at the same time, get those smaller, and I don't want to say smaller, those achievements that'll lead to success and confidence on working towards those bigger goals. Yeah.
Well, obviously, there's so many short-term goals, too. There could be, I want to take a big vacation next year. Mm-hmm. It could be, if you are already a homeowner, all the renovations that go into home ownership. There's a lot of short-term goals out there. And it's about, I think being flexible and being able to prioritize with each other. Because, again, you might not see eye to eye initially.
True. along with those short-term goals from the financial sense, I think you also need to have long-term goals. And again,
Is 2 years considered long term?
2 years is not considered long-term. 2 years is not considered long-term. That long-term goal, again, these goals, again, they give you a roadmap. They give you something to follow, right? They hold you accountable. And the example that I like to use from the long-term goal is, okay, well, I want to pay my mortgage off in X number of years, right? And it doesn't have to be your mortgage, but again, it's looking 5 to 10 years down the line. So you have a plan. Well, if you have a goal, you can have a plan and work toward achieving that plan and reaching that actual goal.
No, yeah, agreed. I feel like mortgage is a big one because, obviously it's not realistic for me to retire in 2 years, but
You trying to will it into existence.
I am. I figure if I keep putting the energy out there, that maybe it'll help me out. But obviously I would not consider personally making like a large, right? Not large, but a big job change without having the mortgage paid off. So, I feel like especially later in life and even earlier in life, a lot of people don't like to have that bill hanging over their heads consistently,
Yeah, and not to stray too far from the path, I wonder if the younger generation coming up, whether or not that's going to actually be a part or play a role in the goals that they set during marriage. But no, I hear you.
Apparently it's becoming a big thing where kids are creating little tiny homes on their parents' property.
Listen, and it's smart. It's smart.
It is smart.
So from the financial perspective, yeah, short-term goals, long-term goals, but a very important one that I'd like to actually touch on is behavior-based goals. And by that, what I mean is looking at how you behave from a financial perspective and being able to change that so you can hit those short and long-term financial goals. You really have to start looking at how your relationship is with spending money and see whether or not you need to change that relationship.
Well, in there, you need to be open-minded and really be able to look at yourself and notice and recognize and admit if you have, I don't want to say completely a spending problem per se, but even you and I, we had a very strict budget for a long time because we did have these short-term and long-term goals that we did want to hit, right? And to make that happen, we made the decision together to kind of curb some of our behavior, where back in the day we would just be, new technology, we had it.
We was getting a discount on it though. Right. And it would go out of style real quick.
We prioritize just convenience and technology at that point in our lives. And then we had to reel it back. And, now we don't get a new iPhone every year, right?
Yeah. And I wasn't getting one every year.
No, I know. But I mean, some people do. But, and that was just purposely done because the short-term and long-term goals to us took more priority than just being able to, have those behavior-based.
Yeah, and the behavior one can be a challenge because you really need to communicate because you have two people now, right? Remember, before you're married, what you did from the perspective of spending was really on you.
Yeah.
Your goals were your goals, and your goals might not have been as, I'm going to use this for lack of a better term, lofty or grand as they are now when you come together. So you have two separate people, and if you both have a frivolous, I don't know if that's the right term, relationship with money, and you need to dial it back. You got to communicate, because you can't have a situation where, okay, well, one person, you both agree on having these goals, and one person changes their behavior with the way they spend, and the other person doesn't. So that behavior piece can be a challenge, but it's important.
No, definitely. There's so many things that can go into that. Do you like going to the casino? Do you like the latest handbag, newest fashion? Oh, which is so funny, because I think I read somewhere that on average, most people wear predominantly like the same 20 outfits.
I believe it.
Right? But yet, we go out and we spend all this money on new clothes all the time.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I don't wear 20 outfits.
I know. Well, lately, I feel like I've been trying to take more of a minimalist approach, and I've been getting rid of so much clothes.
Yeah, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I got so many clothes upstairs that I got to get rid of. But yeah.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, so those are things that you really need to be open-minded and really honest with yourself. Do I really need this? Or is the money better spent towards that long-term goal? Can I put it in my savings account to do whatever it is?
Yeah, and I think looking at things from that perspective is important. And I would also say, talking about achieving those financial goals, it's not just looking at, do I need all of this, or can I cut back on this to reach those longer financial goals? I think another part about that too is it better to spend money on the quality now, right? Yeah. So the quality will last you longer, and you may spend more up front, but in the long term, that's going to help you towards achieving that long-term goal or short-term goal, because you're not spending as often. You may put more up front, but it ends up costing you less.
Yeah, although that's a good point. So some people just buy, spend a couple of bucks, right, on a top and then get rid of it. Or do you spend, a massive amount of money on it? But, when I think about these goals, I also realize that from, just personal experience, that you have to be flexible. So you can say, hey, I want the mortgage paid off in 8 years. However, things come up, things happen. You don't want to be like so rigid that you're just cutting corners and not enjoying yourself either.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like you don't want to give everything up too. Like, you have to go enjoy your time. If it's spending money to go here or there, or go on a quick vacation, maybe you don't do a big Hawaii vacation, but maybe you do like down in the Florida Keys or something like that. For us East Coast people, it would be a much cheaper experience, but still giving you the opportunity to still have a vacation and an experience and enjoy your time together.
Yeah, and I think that rolls perfectly into when you're talking about setting goals, marriage or whatever. They should be SMART goals, right? Mm-hmm. And that term is used for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, right? So it's not just saying, I'm going to save $1 million in 5 years. Well, if you're only making $30,000 a year, that's not very smart. Or I'm going to rule the world. Can we get a bit more specific? What world are you talking about? How are you going to get there? When is this going to happen?
I'm going to rule my Lego world.
Yeah. I think when you start, so that term is used in organizations, it's used in all type of businesses. But again, when you talk about marriage, I think that you should be setting SMART goals, right? They should be specific. You should be able to measure where you are, how close you are to achieving that goal, right? Mm-hmm. Again, if the goals aren't achievable, then you obviously you're never going to make it, and they should be realistic. And again, there should be a time frame attached to it. So I think making sure that whatever it is that you set as a goal, you apply those terms, and you got to make sure you follow through with them too.
Right. There's something called a calculator.
Well,
to see if it's realistic, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I can save $200 a month towards this goal. Well, how much is that goal going to cost you plus inflation?
Yeah.
Right. Trying to figure that out. And then, all right, so $200 a month, how long is it going to take me? So obviously, that will kind of help the realistic piece of it. But so you kind of have to look forward and backwards all at the same time.
Well, yeah, and that's that reassessing piece. But there's also something that you said earlier that is very important that you need to make sure you do when you're talking about, setting these goals, and particularly when it comes to something that is going to end up costing you. You got to stick to a budget.
Yeah.
If you can't stick to a budget, particularly on the financial side, when you have these financial goals, it's going to be tough to meet any of those goals, regardless of how well of a roadmap you have laid out. You can't stick to the budget. Mm-hmm. You're not gonna achieve it.
Well, either make it harder, or you're gonna get yourself over your head in debt.
I mean,
because of it.
So what's the real goal? Is it to be in debt for the rest of your life?
Personally, I would say no. But, I guess to each their own. But I would hope not, right? Like, I think ideally most people want to be able to use their money, but also not put them in a position where they could, outstretch their means into where they're putting.
Got to live within your means.
Yeah, they're going to put themselves at risk, Like, cards are maxed out, mortgage is maxed out, and now I can't.
They're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It at some point it's going to give out.
Yeah. The other, we talked about the financial side or financial goals. The other goals that I think every couple should set in a marriage or types of goals should be communication. I mean, the only way to have a lasting marriage is to be able to effectively communicate. And, a large part of the premise of this whole podcast is based on conversations and having that communication. And when you start talking about how do I have a communication plan for a marriage? Look, everything is communication. It's all part of a relationship. But then I start to think about it. Okay, well, in order to have a communication plan, and we've talked about this in other episodes, there are a few things that you got to actually have to think about, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about having the communication plan, or I keep talking plan, when setting communication goals, I think you should be developing a strategy. And that strategy should consist of a couple things, right?
Okay.
First and foremost, you got to communicate with affection. Mm-hmm. We talked about in the past how everyone is different. When someone feels a certain way, their feelings mean something. Their feelings are valid, regardless of how they arrived at those feelings. So when you actually have to have a conversation or you have to communicate with someone, particularly in your marriage, I think you need to keep that in mind, that you need to be affectionate in that communication, regardless of whether or not you feel that there is something that the other individual, your partner, is feeling that you might not agree with.
Well, right, you're right. So one of the biggest reasons for divorce is the lack of communication. So I think that's why we stress on communication so much, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. Then it's like, well, what does communication consist of, right? And like you said, affection. I would hope that you have some affection because that's why you're together, right? And yeah, everybody's feelings are valid and you have to acknowledge that even if you don't agree with it. And I think then it's about speaking with integrity too, right? Next, it would be like not just be a jerk.
Well, so the integrity piece, what that does is, listen, you can have a conversation, you can communicate, but if you're not communicating with integrity, there's not going to be a level of trust there, because if you don't have integrity, chances are you're not being truthful. Right. You're not being truthful in regards to the relationship. You're not being truthful in regards to how you actually present yourself. So I think the integrity piece is huge. And I think that when you start talking about having a strategy, particularly from the communication, from communicating with with your spouse, I think that's important. And I think that is one of the things that, and when I say one of the things, I think communication is one of the things that, again, I think too many people take for granted. And I think that's one of the reasons why they end up going down that path of divorce.
Yeah. And the biggest piece with integrity, which I feel like a lot of people have difficulty with, is integrity with themselves. Be honest with yourself, because you can't be honest with your partner if you're not honest with yourself.
Yeah.
If you're feeling a specific way for whatever reason, I think people tend to cover it up sometimes. They might get upset, angry, and it's for different reasons than what is really eating at them. I think a lot of people have a hard time with self-reflection, and really they don't want to admit themselves to themselves, which is kind of odd. But I don't know. My personality is different. I don't know if it's a Scorpio thing or what, but I don't mean different between me and you.
No, I'm just trying to figure out where you're going when you say your personality is different, that you don't communicate with integrity. Where are you going with this?
Yeah, I don't communicate with integrity.
Where are you going with this?
I feel like all my life I've always self-reflected.
Yeah.
But I know I've seen it where other people have a hard time with it.
Yeah, and some people do have a hard time with self-reflection, and I think it may be because they haven't had to do it. I think circumstances are different for everyone. I think when it comes to communication, I think self-reflection makes you so much of a better communicator. It's one of those things that I think you should invest time into getting to understand how to put yourself in a space to actually do that. Mm-hmm. I also think that when we talk about that whole integrity piece, I think, people can confuse integrity with being respectful. Uh-huh. And you should have a strategy where when you communicate, you're respectful. But I think those are two very distinct things, because you can be honest, you can be open and disrespectful at the same time.
That's true.
So I think it's important also when you're talking about developing a strategy for communicating and creating those goals for communicating. I think communicating with respect is another important aspect of that strategy.
Yeah. And along with respect is don't be condescending.
Well, condescending and we talked about this specifically. I don't remember which episode it was, but you need to communicate with compassion.
Yes.
So you may not agree with what it is that your partner is saying, doing, or feeling. Mm-hmm. But when you communicate with them, if you want to have a long-lasting marriage, relationship, whatever, you should be communicating with compassion. You said it earlier. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah. That and empathy, right? You need to be able to somewhat put yourself in your partner's shoes to some degree.
Yeah.
And just have that empathetic ear.
True. Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. So from the goal perspective and setting goals in a marriage, I think there are goals that should be set. I think depending on who the individuals are, where they're going in their relationship or in their marriage will determine what specific goals that they're going to set. But I think financial goals, I think communication goals, family goals also, depending. There are some people out there who may not want an actual family, but I think that people should start setting goals for their marriage, just like they set goals in their everyday life and all the other aspects.
Well, I certainly hope that before they got into the marriage, they at least decided on some basic family goals, which are we having kids? Are we not having kids? Right? Like, you need to be on that same page before you enter long-term into a relationship, because that is just going to rear its ugly head and be a battle of contention.
That depends on how well they communicated before they actually got married.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I hope.
If they didn't have very good communication skills, if they didn't develop a strategy or communication goals and they didn't utilize those things, maybe the concept of family and kids don't come up until after the honeymoon.
And again, I think it can change as long as you guys are on the same page. It could be where, like, no, I don't want kids. And then the other person is like, it doesn't matter to me. Whatever you decide, And then that person can be like, you know what? I think I do want them now.
Yeah. I think if you were to go around and ask anyone, what are some of your goals in life? They'd be able to rattle off, boom, 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 1, 2, 3. I think if you were to ask someone newly married, hey, what are some of your marriage goals? Now, they may have an answer for you, but most cases, outside of probably buy a home, I don't know if you would hear much more than that. And I think to be successful in a marriage, it requires you being able to prioritize and hold yourselves accountable. And I think that the way that you actually do that is by setting goals in your marriage. With that being said, let me get to my realization of the week. And it seems like these realizations are opening my eyes to a lot of things. And it's these weeks, I can tell you I am ready for a vacation. So my realization of this week is the energy that you put out into the world is yours to control. And that energy should not be based on what you perceive you're going to receive back from those individuals that you interact with. Because if you allow what you put out to be affected by what you perceive you're going to receive, then you actually have no control in that energy that you're putting out there to begin with. And I say all that to end with this. Don't give individuals power over how you move, what you do, and how you feel. And with that, we'd like to say thanks. Be sure to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.